Welcome to Film Now. This month we'll be getting the lowdown on how to get your film into film festivals. With LFS's festivals coordinator Rowan Ellis, we'll be speaking to Bryony Byrne from Aesthetica Film Festival about what programmers look for, and hearing from a recent winner at Cannes about his insights and experience there. We'll also talk about motion capture with one of the UK's leading experts, John Dower. And last but not least, film school, yes or no? One view from an artist whose love for film played out in LA galleries until he decided to take the plunge and become a director. But first, festivals.
A lot of filmmakers make the mistake of only thinking about festivals once they've already made their film. But in fact, you should be thinking about festivals as part of your overall strategy from the very beginning. Here are 4 tips to get you festival ready. The first thing that you need to think about is the length of your film. Film festivals will have a maximum length that they will allow short films to be entered. Sometimes it will be up to an hour long. But that doesn't mean that you can submit a film that is an hour long and still expect it to do as well as one that's a bit shorter. If you think about it, festivals only have a certain amount of time to program as many great shorts as they can. If your film is an hour long, it has to be better than 4 15-minute films in its place. On top of that, the longer your film is, the more likely it is that they're going to put it at the very end of a set of shorts, which means that it has to be as good as or better than all the shorts that come before it to make sure it's the big finale at the end of the screening. Another thing to think about is what festivals you're going to be submitting to. Now, when you look at festival submission websites like Without a Box or Film Freeway, it can be kind of overwhelming. There are thousands of festivals listed on their sites, so which one should you go for? But there are some tips to go for festivals that might be best for you. For example, festivals which are on the Oscar and BAFTA qualifying festival lists. These are festivals which are essentially generally regarded in the industry as quite high because they are festivals that people will look at in order to see what should be nominated for Best Short Film at the Oscars and the BAFTAs. Another thing to think about might be going for niche festivals that suit your film, for example, horror festivals, LGBT festivals, or festivals for female production teams. One key thing you need to think about is the money that's involved in entering your film into festivals. Now, some festivals will have early bird deadlines which are slightly cheaper, but often you're going to be spending £30–40 for each entry. It's not something you can overlook or underestimate. Think about the amount that people spend on marketing for feature films. You need to be spending that money on festivals because essentially that is your marketing. As a filmmaker, once you've made a short, you know that you need to submit it to festivals, but often I find that people don't know exactly why. Sure, it's great to be screened and maybe to win some awards, but there are so many other ways in which it can be useful for you and your career. Here's Harry Baker, producer of In the Hills, the LFS grad film that got into the Cannes Cinéfantastique, to tell you more.
In the Hills is my friend Hamid's graduation film from LFS. For him, I think it started with one of his close friends who works in a fish and chip shop in Brimscombe in the Cotswolds, which is where the film is set and where we shot it. And I think it was that contrast between the refugee sort of, rather low-paid, low-status job and this very sort of idyllic English, beautiful countryside setting that first sparked his imagination. So my principal job actually is editing. That's what I mostly have specialised in at the school, and I've worked on several grad films in that respect, and I was signed on as Hamid's editor. But unfortunately, his original producer had some other commitments come up and was unable to finish the film. This was about a month before we started shooting. And so Hamid asked me to step into the breach, and with some trepidation I did, and so that was the beginning. It was actually the first film I've produced. We had been mainly focusing actually on getting the film finished for the LFS hand-in deadline that the school has. So, it was a kind of full pelt run to the finish line, and I think Hamid submitted it to the Cannes Cinéfantastique the day after we handed in to LFS, and then suddenly a week, 2 weeks later, he emailed me with the news that we'd actually been accepted, and I think my initial reaction was just what. Cannes is sort of, I think for any aspiring filmmaker, the kind of gold standard. It's such a famous festival, such a reputable festival. To suddenly have this kind of we're an official selection moment is breathtaking. It's the kind of am I actually, wow, us, really, we're worthy, we're on that level. I think to a large extent, actually, the first few days we just spent adjusting to it and getting as many tickets to things as we could and going to the parties and, just sort of enjoying the experience of being there. Very quickly we went from a kind of, yeah, we're kind of here to enjoy the thing, we don't really have anything planned, to we need to sit down and take a couple of hours and actually, you know, we need to have a project now to start talking to people about. We also are very conscious of some of the things that we've missed, and that actually, you know, for the next big festival screenings we have, where we need to focus a bit more on having that plan up front and making those contacts happen a bit more objectively. We've had a couple of festivals, you know, just ask to have the film. We've had several others who are, you know, looking at it for free. You know, just the fact that we can actually get it out there without having to pay, you know, 40, 50 quid every time is quite important, and that has been a help to us. It has definitely opened doors. Everyone and their mother at a film school has made a short film, but if you say, you know, my last short film was an official selection at Cannes and it actually won a prize, you know, straight away you're operating in a slightly different ballpark. People will call you back.
There's basically space for whatever sort of film it is that you've created. There's space for it at Aesthetica. And what I look for when I'm programming a film is something that has a compelling subject matter, told in a way that I guess is efficient and tells a visual story. I'm looking for films that know how to use their time well. For me, I enjoy the human aspect of stories as well, so anything that kind of involves insight into either an issue or an individual is really important to me. So for instance, there was a film a couple of years ago about a 90-year-old woman who lived on some outer Scottish islands, really remotely, alone. And the filmmaker had just managed to completely encapsulate this woman's spirit, and her spirit was a brilliant one that involved the idea of growing old being a privilege, because not everyone gets to do that. So things like that are really important. Insights into why people do things and why certain ideas or concepts are interesting to people.
Motion capture essentially is taking human motion and creating data that can then be animated. It means that animation becomes more lifelike, which is what audiences appear to want, or at least is proving very popular. As we move into the realm of digital production, where environments are digital, where lighting is digital, creating characters that are digital and putting them into that space is essential. Particularly when it comes to things like VR, we're going to be needing to have digital characters. So there is a kind of need, an essential need for motion captured animation. It's cheaper for animators to create lifelike animation by capturing motion and then tweaking it afterwards. Because if you look at a video game that requires a character to be moving for thousands of moves or for hundreds of hours of gameplay, to hand animate that would be a huge laborious process. So it makes a huge economic sense, as well as being a necessity in terms of digital production. People sort of think of it as a medium which is there simply because it's out of necessity, or that the actual movement, the data that we capture, is kind of generic. It doesn't have a personality. It's, you know, actors historically have been put off motion capture because they think, well, it's not capturing my face, it's just capturing my movements, or so what? Whereas I think lots of actors now, particularly with the rise of Andy Serkis and the sort of the talk about Oscars for his performance in some of his films, I think actors begin to realise how interesting it is as a medium and how much of their personality actually is brought into their performance. Television is starting to use it. As we know, films use it all the time, especially in the backgrounds and with creating crowds and things like that. You know, Call of Duty just used Kevin Spacey. So the video games go, we can get more players to play this because we've got Kevin Spacey's face on the box and we've got Guy Ritchie's name as the director. In a way, you know, that's That's glitzy, and it's about, you know, attracting players by putting big names, profile names. So there certainly are directors out there working in video games coming on board. I'm more interested in the craft of it, and trying to persuade people by actually saying there's really interesting stories being told in video games these days. You would be silly to overlook it.
I came from freelance illustration and theatre. With the illustration, I trained in fine art at Leeds University. I studied in America for a little while as well, doing kind of painting, photography. I studied there for a while as well. I became interested in the kind of the pop culture illustration hybrid that was starting to come to the fore. There was a gallery called Mondo Gallery that had opened in Texas, and that was starting to get some traction. It was getting a lot of publicity for some of the shows that they were putting on. And there was another gallery, Gallery 1988. They just opened as well. They were doing like a similar kind of thing. And it was a world that I wanted to get into. I really enjoyed that kind of, let's say, that hybrid of illustration and pop culture, and how you could translate the themes of a film into a single graphic image. So I started out, my first one was with Hero Complex Gallery over in Los Angeles. One of the last ones that I did with them was we did a launch party for American Horror Story for 20th Century Fox. I started writing my own plays. I've done a few one-act plays now, and they grew their own legs after a little while, and it gave you a bit of confidence to say, actually, maybe I'm quite good at writing, maybe it's something worth pursuing. The first time at LFS was quite intense. It was, but a really good experience. You know, my biggest takeaway from it was that it was such a wake-up call in spotting the difference between working in theatre and working in film. In theatre, you've got the luxury of kind of running through a whole play for an hour, blocking it minutely and kind of talking about how each line is going to be interpreted. But again, you know, you kind of, when you put on a play, you've got a captive audience in front of you and they just watch the whole thing play out. But with film, it was so much about putting together individual shots and how they flow into a story, and you've got to kind of have it more in your head of what the tone and the flow of the film is going to be. In theatre, there's a certain degree of theatricality that you need to have, you know, in order for the people in the back row to see what it is that you're doing. You know, you can wave your arms about and kind of shout your head off, but it's so much more subtle in the film, and it was a really good lesson in kind of crafting the performances, not only on the set, in how you talk to the actors, but also in the editing room, in looking at the more theatrical elements and taking those away and paring it down to something that's going to be kind of more truthful to the story that you want to tell. One of the main things I want to take away from my LFS is to graduate as a director. I mean, the thing about the course is that it's really good in rounding you out. So we'll try editing, cinematography, directing, writing, you know, it's a bit of everything. And for me, it was important to come to a school that did all those things, because when I'm on a set eventually, I want to be able to talk to everybody in the language that they're going to understand, that they're going to respond to. I think the worst thing you could do is kind of walk onto a set and feel vulnerable to someone else's knowledge, because at the end of the day, if you're a director, you've got to shape your vision, you've got to shape the film, you've got to tell the story you want to tell, and you've got to try and get everybody along to try and tell that story with you so they're all on the same page. I think if you just don't have that, if you don't have that common language, then it's going to be more of a struggle. Not impossible, but more of a struggle.
That's it from us at Film Now. Good luck with your festival experience, and thanks for joining us.